Malcolm Carter, 17 years old, stepped into Harrington Jewelers with a pocket full of savings and a heart full of excitement. He had worked for months to buy his sister a birthday gift, but within minutes, his joy turned to dread. A suspicious store clerk accused him of theft. Then, the police arrived. It was a warm, sunny afternoon in Somerville, a small suburban town where people greeted each other by name. The scent of fresh coffee and blooming flowers drifted through the air, blending with the sound of children laughing in the nearby park. Cars rolled lazily down the street, their drivers unhurried, waving to familiar faces on the sidewalk. Everything about the town exuded a sense of peace, a place where nothing truly unexpected ever happened. For Malcolm Carter, today was different, special. He had spent months working late shifts at Miller's Diner, wiping down tables long after most customers had gone home, counting his tips carefully at the end of each night. Every dollar he saved had a purpose: to buy the perfect birthday gift for his little sister, Layla. She had talked about it for months, tracing her fingers over its image in magazines, eyes shining with hope. A silver charm bracelet, delicate and beautiful, something she could treasure forever. He had passed Harrington Jewelers countless times, always admiring the elegance of the store from a safe distance. The polished glass, the gold-lettered name on the sign, the quiet hum of wealth and refinement that seeped from within. It was a place he had never considered stepping into before. But today, he had a reason. Today, he belonged there. As he approached the gleaming display window, his stomach fluttered with nerves. He could already feel the weight of unseen eyes, the assumptions, the whispers he had learned to ignore. He hesitated for just a second. Would they even let me buy something? The thought was fleeting, but it lingered long enough to make his breath hitch. He forced himself forward. He wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. He had the money. He had a purpose. That was all that mattered. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. Harrington Jewelers was as elegant as Malcolm had imagined. Velvet-lined cases, sparkling chandeliers, and the faint scent of polished wood. The soft chime of the door closing behind him seemed almost intrusive in the hushed luxury of the store. The gleaming surfaces reflected the wealth that filled the space, casting a glow over the meticulously arranged displays of gold and diamonds. Customers, mostly wealthy older women, browsed the collections with an air of quiet entitlement. Their diamond rings caught the light as they lifted delicate necklaces from their velvet cushions, murmuring in approval or dismissing them with a flick of manicured fingers. It was a world Malcolm had never stepped into before, and for a moment, he felt like an outsider. Behind the counter stood Margaret Whitmore, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. She carried herself with the poise of someone accustomed to catering to an elite clientele. At first, her expression was neutral, her attention drifting across the room in casual observation. Then, her gaze landed on Malcolm. Her posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, but the shift was unmistakable. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she took in his hoodie, his jeans, his sneakers. Malcolm felt it instantly, the unspoken scrutiny, the quiet but deliberate assessment of whether he belonged here. He ignored it. He had been through this before. Instead, he approached the counter with quiet confidence, pointing at the charm bracelet displayed inside the glass. "I'd like to see that one, please," he said, his tone polite but firm. Margaret's arms folded across her chest. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice coated in a layer of condescension so thin it almost sounded polite. "It's quite expensive." Malcolm didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his neatly folded cash, and placed it carefully on the counter. "I've got the money," he said, meeting her gaze without hesitation. Margaret's eyes flicked down to the cash. For a fleeting second, something like irritation flashed across her face. She didn't move to take the money or retrieve the bracelet. Instead, her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, a hint of amusement laced with something far colder. "And where exactly did you get all that money?" she asked, her voice smooth but sharp, as if she were indulging a suspicion she had already made up her mind about. Malcolm felt his stomach tighten. He had expected this, but the sting of it still hit hard. He took a slow breath. "I work at Miller's Diner. I saved up for this." Margaret raised an eyebrow, tapping her nails lightly against the glass case. "Right. A teenager with this much cash. That's hard to believe." The weight of her words settled over him, but Malcolm refused to back down. He had worked for this, earned this. He wasn't going to let her take that away from him. Malcolm clenched his jaw, but kept his cool. He had dealt with this kind of judgment before. He wasn't here to argue or prove anything to anyone. He just wanted to buy the bracelet and leave. "Can I just see the bracelet, please?" he asked, his voice steady, masking the frustration brewing beneath the surface. Margaret sighed dramatically, her fingers tightening around the glass case as if reluctant to fulfill his request. Finally, she pulled out the bracelet, placing it in front of him with exaggerated care. "Be careful with it," she warned, her tone sharp, almost like a threat. "It's worth more than what you probably make in a year." Malcolm ignored the insult. He wasn't going to let her bait him. Instead, he focused on the bracelet, gently picking it up. It was even more beautiful up close, the silver glinting under the store's bright lighting. He imagined how Layla's eyes would light up when she saw it wrapped around her wrist. This was worth every hour he had spent, working late, every tip he had saved. Then, it happened. The bracelet slipped. Clink. It bounced against the glass counter before tumbling onto the polished tile floor. For a split second, Malcolm's breath caught in his throat. He instinctively reached to pick it up, but before he could move, a sharp, piercing scream sliced through the air. "I knew it!" Margaret shrieked, her voice cutting through the hushed murmurs of the store. "You were trying to steal it." Every head in the store turned toward them. Eyes widened. Conversations died. The soft hum of classical music playing in the background seemed distant, irrelevant compared to the suffocating weight of the accusation now hanging over him. "Wait, no." "It just slipped," Malcolm said, his heart pounding, his palms suddenly damp. But the words felt hollow in the face of her certainty, in the face of the narrative she had already constructed. Margaret grabbed the store phone with shaking fingers, but there was no hesitation in her actions. "Get the police here now," she barked. "We have a thief, a young black male in a hoodie." Malcolm stood frozen in place. A thief. The weight of that word pressed down on him like a stone. The label had been stamped on him in an instant, and he knew how difficult it would be to shake it off. He could already feel the shift in the room, the way the other customers took a step back, the way a woman clutched her purse a little tighter, the way no one questioned Margaret's words. Then, in the distance, sirens, cold, sharp, and approaching fast. 2 officers stormed in, their heavy boots thudding against the polished tile floor. The air in the store, already thick with tension, seemed to constrict further. Sergeant Blake, a burly older man with graying hair and a hardened expression, immediately reached for his handcuffs. His stance was rigid, his movements swift, as if this was a situation he had handled 100 times before. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Malcolm's pulse hammered in his ears. His hands instinctively twitched at his sides, but he forced himself to remain perfectly still. "I didn't do anything," he tried to explain, his voice coming out steadier than he felt. Margaret folded her arms across her chest, smirking. She tilted her head slightly, looking almost amused by the scene unfolding before her. "Oh, please. You people always think you can get away with things." The words sliced through Malcolm, sharper than any accusation. You people. As if who he was, his very existence, was somehow criminal in itself. His stomach turned, but he bit down the anger rising in his throat. Reacting now would only make things worse. Officer Doyle, younger and less certain, hesitated. His eyes flicked between Malcolm and Margaret, something unreadable flashing across his face. "Step outside," Blake ordered, his hand tightening around the cuffs. Malcolm inhaled deeply. He had seen how this could play out. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and everything could spiral out of control. He needed to stay calm, needed to think. Then, he made the call. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone, but his voice was clear. "Mom, I need you at Harrington Jewelers. Now." Minutes later, the glass door swung open, slamming against the stopper with a force that made everyone in the store turn. The sudden gust of air sent a ripple through the quiet, stirring the tension that already hung heavy in the space. Customers stopped pretending to browse. Margaret's fingers clenched on the counter. The officers stiffened, their eyes darting toward the entrance, sensing the shift in power before they even knew why. A tall woman in a tailored navy blue suit moved with sharp precision, each step measured, deliberate. Her eyes, dark and commanding, swept across the room, taking in every detail. The officers, the customers, the nervous store clerk. But her gaze finally settled on one person, Malcolm. She reached into her pocket and with a swift, practiced motion, flipped open an FBI badge. "I'm Special Agent Camille Carter," she announced, her voice even, but laced with a deadly edge. "And this is my son." The store fell silent. The impact of her words rippled across the space, the weight of her authority crashing down like a tidal wave. Sergeant Blake stiffened, his grip on the handcuffs faltering. His eyes darted between Camille and Malcolm, the realization of his mistake settling in like a lead weight. Margaret's face drained of color. Her confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a stunned, almost panicked expression. Camille took a slow step forward, her gaze never leaving Blake's. "Sergeant, did you review the security footage before deciding my son was guilty?" Blake hesitated. The answer was clear in his hesitation, in the way his fingers flexed against the cold steel of the cuffs. Doyle, standing beside him, swallowed hard, but said nothing. "I suggest you do so now," Camille continued, her voice like a blade, slicing through the charged silence. The store manager, who had been standing motionless, suddenly snapped into action. He fumbled with the controls, his hands unsteady as he pulled up the footage from the store's security cameras. The screen flickered to life behind the counter, drawing the attention of every person in the store. The video played in stark, undeniable clarity. It showed Malcolm entering the store, approaching the counter, and handing over his money. It captured the way he carefully held the bracelet, the way it slipped from his grasp and tumbled onto the counter before falling to the floor. No theft, no pocketing, no crime. Just a teenager trying to buy a gift. A heavy silence followed. Blake's jaw tightened as he exhaled through his nose, his pride warring with the truth laid bare before him. Doyle shifted uncomfortably beside him, rubbing a hand along the back of his neck. Camille turned her attention back to Blake. "So, Sergeant," she said smoothly, her voice controlled, Measured, dangerous. What happens now? 3 days later, Harrington Jewelers was everywhere. The story had spread like wildfire, dominating local news and sparking national outrage. Footage from the security cameras, along with witness accounts, painted an undeniable picture of racial profiling and injustice. Some local outlets initially tried to spin the narrative, claiming the store had acted out of caution, but the overwhelming public response crushed those defenses. The store's Yelp page was flooded with one-star reviews, and even longtime customers began cutting ties. Social media exploded with heated discussions. Hashtags demanding accountability trended across platforms. News stations ran back-to-back coverage, dissecting every detail. Some called it an isolated incident. Others pointed out how often stories like this ended without justice. The public wanted answers, and for once, those in power were forced to respond. Margaret Whitmore was placed on indefinite leave. The store released a statement denouncing discrimination, but it rang hollow. Customers boycotted. Protesters gathered outside, their signs demanding change. Reviews flooded in, tanking the store's once pristine reputation. Sergeant Blake faced an internal investigation. Body cam footage, or rather the lack of it, raised further questions. The department scrambled to contain the fallout, but the damage was done. Doyle, the younger officer, had quietly spoken to reporters, hinting at deeper issues within the force. The community watched, waiting to see if real consequences would follow. Malcolm sat on the couch, scrolling through article after article, each one dissecting what had happened. He should have felt victorious. He had been proven innocent. His mother had turned the situation around. Justice had been served, or at least some version of it. A sudden squeal of delight broke his thoughts. Layla, oblivious to everything, twirled her wrist in front of him, watching the silver charms on her new bracelet glint in the light. "Look, Malcolm. It's perfect." Her excitement was pure, unburdened by everything it had taken to get it. But all he could think was, if my mom hadn't been who she was, how different would this have ended? The thought lingered, heavy and unshakable. He exhaled, setting his phone aside. The world had seen what happened, but he knew too well that for many others, there wouldn't be an audience, a camera, or a powerful ally to step in. Justice isn't always immediate, but this time, accountability happened. The world saw what unfolded, and for once, those responsible were forced to answer for their actions. But how many others face the same injustice without a voice, without a camera, without an advocate? Have you ever witnessed unfair treatment? How did it make you feel? If you believe in standing up for what's right, type 1. If you think more needs to be done, type 2. If this story resonated with you, hit like and subscribe for more powerful stories that shed light on truth and justice. Your voice matters.